All right, we'll get started. 4:02, so just a couple minutes late. Not too bad for the first time. Welcome to our first virtual booth demo. We're just getting started with doing some virtual events now that there's no more air show season. We're going to be doing these Q&As, happy hours, interviews with some people that work with us, all coming up in the coming weeks and months throughout the year. We're at the Dynon or my Dynon home studio. I have a panel here so I can demonstrate some features. How this works is, I like to think about this as if you're visiting me at the booth, as if we were at Sun and Fun together or Oshkosh. And that means if you have a question while I'm demoing and you're on the Zoom, let me know and I'd love to answer that. You can interrupt me. There's not a huge crowd here right now. I don't think there's anybody on the Zoom currently. So if you are watching on Facebook Live, there is a link in the event that there's an event. You probably saw the Facebook Live and got on that way. But if you go to the Dynon page on Facebook, there's an event. If you go in there, there's a Zoom link. If you join up on Zoom, you can join the actual stream that's feeding Facebook Live and ask questions from there. Since there is nobody on the Zoom, I'm not going to talk about how Zoom works. And I have a couple of colleagues helping, and none of that matters because it's just me right now. So about me, I'm Michael Schofield. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Dynon. I've been here for about 15 years. I'm a pilot. I co-own a Glass Air Sportsman with about 8 other Dynon folks. And yeah, that's basically me. I'm going to jump right into it and start talking about SkyView. So what I have here is a SkyView HDX panel. And this happens to be a certified panel, but the equipment's the same, the pricing's the same, whether you have a certified aircraft or an experimental amateur built. And so what SkyView is a complete integrated glass cockpit avionics system. It really does everything. So really, so I'll start with just a really high level overview and then we'll dive into each of the feature areas and talk about that. So first, SkyView comes in both 10-inch, 7-inch screens. We're looking at a 10-inch screen. If I pan over here, you can see there's another one over there that's overly lit by the studio lighting. This is a 10-inch screen. The major features are primary flight display with HSI, engine monitoring, and we can display that different ways. I'll get into that in more detail later. Moving map, which is this. That encompasses full flight planning and navigation, suitable for use in VFR conditions, and is really useful in IFR, although if you're IFR, you'll pair our system with an IFR navigator. Let's see what else. Going along the top here, you can see we have Autopilot, that's 2-axis, actually even 3-axis. For some aircraft, we now have yaw damper available. Transponder. Full MODIS transponder. It's also your ADS-B out when you have a SkyView system, or can be. I'd recommend it. It's probably the most affordable way to be equipped with ADS-B out if you have a SkyView system. That's a clock or a timer. If you have our Comm radio, and there's the Comm radio panel, I'll talk about that a little bit later up there. But the Comm radio has an interface in product as well. And let's see what else. We have we have traffic and weather, which is via ADS-B. On this demo panel, you can see there's some weather. You see some terrain, but here's some weather and a recording. It's not like this right now. It's actually reasonably nice in Seattle at the moment, which is where we're out of. And let's see, what am I missing? Transponder, ADS-B in and out, Autopilot. I think that's the core 7 or 8 components of what a SkyView system is. I'll show you the bits and pieces that make it up as well later. But now I'll just kind of dive into into each of those components or each of those feature areas and talk a little bit about them. So first, before we talk about what each element does, let's talk about how to use SkyView HDX. So SkyView HDX is a touchscreen, a touch controlled product, but we also have a full complement of buttons and knobs. You can do almost everything in the system either way, which is really convenient when you're in turbulence. When things are nice, the touchscreen is nice out. The touchscreen is real nice. But if you're in turbulence and your arm is kind of outstretched in the cockpit, you know, you get a little bit of this going on if you're really bouncing around. So having hard controls for everything is really nice. SkyView HDX has this canted bezel, which lets you grab onto the display in turbulence as well, and also, you know, of course, the knobs allow you to control things. So I'll kind of go through, when I talk about a feature, I'll talk both about touch and hard controls. So let's talk a little bit about general usage of how to use SkyView. You know, if you only needed to know 2 or 3 things, this covers almost everything. One is that all of your display layout controls are under the display button. If I push the display button, we're going to get, you know, a series of touchscreen buttons like full, which makes things full screen, like your primary flight display, or I can do a split screen and choose map or engine monitor. So I can choose map. Now I have split screen map. In SkyView HDX, when you have everything on one screen, the engine monitoring information is on the bottom band. That's the 20% of the screen here. We can touch the, you know, just like you have on many apps on your phone or tablet, we can touch that button. That'll expand the map to expand over what was half of the engine monitoring information. So when you're setting up, if you are a home builder, you want to put all of your primary engine instruments over on the left side, or the first half of the bottom band. Let's see. So going back to the display concept, we can bring up the engine monitoring in a split screen configuration. The other thing you'll notice is the concept of there's full screen, and then you can see it says split content. And what that means is each display is defined by a primary role. The primary role of the display we're looking at right now is PFD. That means when I go PFD, it's going to make that as big as it can. And if the engine bottom band is turned on, that'll remain as well. You can have a full screen map, and if the primary role of the display was map, then when you have a full screen map. So that depends on how the display is configured in the deeper setup menu. But that's basically the main thing you need to know about changing the display. If you have multiple displays, which I do have here, and I hit the swap button, that will flip-flop them back and forth. So there was a map over there, now there's a PFD, or primary flight display, over there. So again, display, swap back, and now the primary flight display is over here. It's really nice when you're in a training environment. If you want to throw, if the instructor wants to throw over or take away the primary flight instrument from right in front of the student, for example, or it's nice if you just if you're showing a friend how to fly and quickly want to show them what you're seeing without reconfiguring the whole display. So that's kind of one thing you need to know. The other thing is that all the controls, or most of the controls for the various subsystems and features, are under the menu button. So if we click the menu button, you can see we have autopilot controls. I can go back. We have transponder controls, or go back. Timer, comm radio, you get the idea. There's also, under PFD tools, under map layers, this is where you configure some of your preference. So if I want the PFD, the primary flight display, to show a 6-pack instead of the EFIS display, let's say I'm just getting new to glass, I want to turn off the synthetic vision. Now I've got, call it training mode or self-training mode, where this is familiar to practically every pilot, even if you've never seen an EFIS display, and that's just a few touches away. So again, we can go to menu, PFD tools, synthetic vision, 6-pack, and we've changed the configuration that quickly. So again, display, reconfigures the display. Menu is where all your controls and preferences are. Now, all of these major areas like comm radio, transponder, autopilot, there's an even quicker way to get to those, which is just touch their representation, which is along the top of the top bar. So we call this the top bar, this, you know, top ½ inch of the screen. So if I touch the autopilot, that's going to bring up the autopilot menu. It's the same thing doing that. So going back to the hard controls versus soft controls, if I touch the autopilot here, that's the same thing as going menu, autopilot. Similarly, if I touch the transponder, that's going to pop the transponder menu, comm radio, same thing. So you now know how to get to almost everything in SkyView. And then you also have these two rotating pressable knobs. And you're going to use them to adjust the things you adjust in flight, your altimeter setting, your heading bug, your altitude bug. And if you have autopilot, you're going to be, you know, touching, adjusting those things quite a lot. So there's a couple of ways to use those. One is, so first I'm just going to bring everything up. I'm going to do kind of the all-in-one. If you had one 10-inch display, this is how it would be set up. If I want to adjust, let's say, the the heading bug, I can click this knob, and now I get a little menu along the side here, and I can select heading. And then when I rotate the knob, you can see the heading bug is moving. Same thing for altitude. So I can click this knob. This is really the call it the hard way. It's not that hard, but this is the hard way to adjust things. I'm adjusting the altitude bug now because I adjusted altitude. Normally though, so this would be like the turbulence enabling feature. Normally the way you would adjust these things is just by touching altitude. That knob has just been reassigned to altitude. Now I spin, I touch the heading. Now I'm adjusting heading. I want to adjust the altimeter setting. So on and so forth. We also have, so those are the two ways to, there's actually a third, which is even easier. So one is using the knob to select what it's adjusting. The other is to touch the thing on the primary flight display you want to adjust. And the third is if you opt for our knob module, which is which has altitude, which has 3 knobs for adjusting altitude, altimeter setting, and track and heading. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So now you actually know practically everything you need to know about how to use SkyView, at least the basics. And then the other buttons that we didn't talk about yet, that's all mapping and flight plan. They're almost obvious, flight plan, direct to, nearest stuff, info about whatever you want to call up. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. So now we have a pretty good system overview and basic usage, and that's what is that, about a 5-minute lesson. So so it doesn't take too long to learn SkyView HDX. I'm going to dive into each of the different areas. So first, primary flight display. Primary flight display is all of your flight instruments, everything that would normally be in your 6-pack and even more. So on the left, this is your airspeed. Notice you have the equivalent on the round gauge of the colored arc, which tells you your things like VNE, your flaps range. We have below it true airspeed, which is enabled by the use of our OAT probe, which comes with the primary flight instrument module, the ADAHRS. Ground speed, this is GPS based. So this will this is the speed you're making over the ground. That'll be different than your true airspeed by the difference of by whatever winds are aloft. And then also, since we know where you're going over the ground and where you're and which way you're pointed and what your true airspeed is and what your GPS ground speed is, we can tell you what if you have a crosswind, a headwind, and what the crosswind component is. So this can be super useful as you're lining up in the pattern. You kind of get the real condition, the real conditions near the airport. So that's airspeed. There's also an airspeed bug, so we can adjust that. We can bug that. If you have the autopilot, you can fly different airspeed, so you can just you can climb out, engage autopilot, set it to VY, keep on climbing. Going across, we have attitude with synthetic vision. Right now, this is actually telling us that if we don't change, this is red. There's terrain alerting here. This is red. If you don't make a change to where you're going, it's going to be a bad day. I'm not sure if I'm going to outclimb it. Looks like I'm going to outclimb it with the adjustments I just made. So that's attitude. We have these 2 little cyan pips are telling you what the angle you would need to make a standard rate turn or a 2-minute turn, which is useful in IFR, of course. Above that, we got the slip skid ball, works just like you think it should. Step on the ball. And then its complement, which is the turn rate indicator. So the ball plus that is sort of your turn and bank. This is turn rate. In our demo, it kind of snaps to what is a standard rate turn. So the second tick where it is, that's saying a standard rate turn. So that kind of grows, that little magenta thing grows as your turn rate winds up. Moving across the screen, actually I missed one. Angle of attack. This is showing our angle of attack. There's a nice visual display here, but frankly, I like flying with it mostly audibly, which means when I kind of round out and do my pre-flare, I'll start hearing SkyView's tone, which I can't demonstrate right this second, but it's kind of like a beep. It's almost like a Geiger counter. It starts, beep, 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 beep. And by the time you're, nicely, just about stalled and, about to touch the wheels, you should kind of get your solid beep tone. And it's super nice. It's better than any, stall indicator you've had on a Cessna, but it is progressive. So, like any trainer, like a Cessna 172, where you can sort of hear the airflow starting to separate, and you can hear the burble, and then the stall warning kind of starts to rattle a little bit, and you can use those cues. SkyView's AOA audible indicator does that as well. Moving along to the right, we've got the altitude tape. It's altitude. There's a bug which you can set as either a reminder, or if you have an autopilot installed, it'll fly this bug as your autopilot target. Altimeter setting is right below. So if we touch that and adjust or use the knob, we can. If you have ADSB in weather, it's even easier. We can just press and hold the knob or the dedicated barrow button on the knob module. We press and hold that, and it knows that we are near Payne Field. That's our nearest weather reporting station. I don't need to go look up the weather. We know what it is through ADSB. Push and hold that for a second, and it syncs to that station. Density altitude, most useful on the ground, of course, for performance calculations on hot days, although not in most home-built airplanes, but definitely useful for certified. Vertical speed tells you, just saying we're 1,500 feet climbing right now. If I were to adjust my vertical speed, we're kind of in a pseudo demo autopilot mode. You can see that's moving now. We're 800 feet up. OAT, outside air temperature. And then down here, we've got heading, kind of a, you can think either as a, well, so the heading is actually, it's actually magnetic heading, but it does use the inertial sensors and the rate sensors of the SkyView ADAHRS to stabilize it. So you won't get any lead or lag effects. It's always giving you the actual magnetic heading as measured magnetically, but helped out by the stabilization of SkyView sensors. So you get the numerical there, you get the full DG style card right below it. It's also an HSI. So right now, I don't have anything programmed, so I'm just gonna quickly do a direct to whatever the nearest place is. So now you can see that's turned into an HSI. The info block for the HSI is below. It's saying this is SkyView's flight plan. The place I just navigated to is 12 miles away, and that's the thing that it is. If I touch that, I can choose from different nav sources. So if I have a external nav radio or an IFR or GPS, touching that will cycle through the different sources. Got heading bug down here, course, which when you're on a GPS flight plan, the course is implicitly set by or automatically set by the flight plan or the direct to that you have. And if we were on a VOR, the screen means we're on a nav radio, so this is a VOR, then I can actually adjust the course and center the needle to fly inbound or outbound on a VOR or align with the ILS if we were shooting an approach. So that's the PFD in a nutshell. Let's see if I missed anything. I think we're looking pretty good there. Next, I'll move down into engine monitoring. Engine monitoring is everything. So just sweeping from left to right, we've got fuel quantity, manifold pressure, tachometer, fuel flow, a whole bunch of other fuel flow calculations and numericals. A bunch of information about our timers, our hobs and tach time. Some fuel computer information is interspersed in here. This is all, by the way, customizable. If you don't like this layout, you can make it your own. Fuel pressure, oil temperature, everything's configurable, alarmable. All of the common things that everybody has, like oil pressure, for example. There are custom audible alerts. You'll hear like oil pressure high if your oil pressure was high. Going along the right, this is a setup for 4 cylinders. We have 4 cylinder head temperatures or CHTs, 4 exhaust gas temperatures. Actually, I flipped that. These are the CHTs. Those are the EGTs. Neither of them are realistic in this demo. But you could see one of them, one of the CHTs is a little hot right now. So it's yellow. This one is higher than the red line we've set, so it's in red. Battery volts, amps. This could be set up as either an amp meter or a load meter, depending on where you install the amp shunt or the sensor that senses amps. And then we have other aircraft information like flaps and trim, 3 axes, up to 3 axes on the trim. You can elevator, aileron trim, rudder trim if you have it. Flaps is configurable. This is showing 0 to 20 in one big sweep, but it can be 0 to 40 or 50 if you have it. We could show reflex flaps if you have some negative flaps. I'm going to swing back over here and talk about some of the fuel computer things. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a bigger view of the engine monitoring. And let's see, scooch in a little bit. So here we have a separated view of the cylinder head and the exhaust gas temperatures. And then, so we have fuel quantity. These are right from your tank senders. Your resistive or capacitance tank senders, these are measuring the actual quantity of fuel in your tanks. It'll do it a lot better than any airplane that you've flown that has an old gauge that maybe works at 0 and maybe doesn't, or that you don't trust, that you're always dipping the fuel stick. You do a calibration, you demonstrate 0 gallons, 1 gallon, or 2, 4, 6, 8. Actually, when you do the calibration, SkyView is smart enough to adjust the pours that you make, or to suggest the right, for example, if you have a 50-gallon tank, it might ask you for 5-gallon pours, so you don't have to sit there all day. You can just do 10 points to get your calibration. So this is going to be really accurate fuel quantity down to the gallon, even the sub-gallon. And then we also have, I mentioned fuel flow, and fuel flow enables a whole robust set of fuel computer calculations. With a fuel computer, the way that works is we go to Engine Tools and then Fuel, and then we can see what the in-tank sensors, what these guys say, and then when we fill up, we can adjust how much fuel is what the fuel computer thinks. We could also just say, I filled up, and that means there's 30 gallons on board. And so, I guess zooming out just a bit, this is telling you how much is in your tank. The fuel computer is, you tell it how much is in the tank, like when you fill up. And then based on the flow, it's doing calculations to tell you things like how many miles per gallon you're going over. We have GPS, we know how many miles per gallon you're making over the ground. How many gallons are you've used based on not the direct measurements, but what the fuel flow computer says. How many waypoints you'll have, the system estimates you'll have, or how many gallons you'll have at the waypoint, and what your range till empty is. And all those are based on calculations that the fuel computer makes rather than the tank senders. Where that can be really nice is it can help you if you happen to have, let's say, a fuel system configuration issue where you're venting fuel overboard, or you forgot to put the gas cap on. You're going to see, your fuel computer, because the fuel computer measures what goes through the engines. So you'll still see, let's say, a ton of range, but if you're seeing, what the fuel computer thinks diverge from what the tank senders think, that's a signal that something's up with your fuel system, assuming that your fuel computer is well calibrated. There are other things that we can do. There's a lean assist mode, so it's a little hard to demo on the demo display, but if I go to menu, engine tools, and say lean, we're in a different mode where it then helps you, as each EGT peaks, it'll tell you how much cooler it is in peak. And so whether you're a member of the Church of Lean of Peak or Rich of Peak, it'll tell you, how many degrees cooler than peak you are. It'll also give you what's known as the GAMI spread, which is the fuel flow difference between the first and last cylinder to peak. So it really has all the tools that you need to do that. If you have a normally aspirated, non-exotic, Lycoming Continental Superior engine, we can also tell you, even when it doesn't matter if you're in the lean mode or not, whether you're lean of peak or rich of peak, at all times, your percent horsepower, and then the number of horsepower. Let's see, I don't think I have it up on the screen right now. Let's see, so that covers, I think, most of the engine monitoring capability. Certainly not all of it, but that's at least a reasonable overview. We talked about HSI, so I'm going to move on to mapping. So I'm going to do a quick reconfiguration to say that the map is now my primary function on the screen, and I'm going to make that full screen. So now we have a full screen map. I'm actually also going to turn off really quickly the engine bottom band, and now we have a full screen map. So the map works kind of how you'd expect it would. We all have tablets and phones, and this works the same way. If it is turbulent, you can still move around, but maybe you can't quite. Pinching to zoom could be a little bit annoying. The knob also does that. So if you have a primary flight display and a map up, one knob will be for all those primary flight display bug adjustments, and the other one will be for the map zoom in and zoom out. So just orienting ourselves, so we're kind of flying around the greater Seattle area here. So that we have weather on, so if we have ADS-B traffic and weather, these colored balls are telling us that this field's VFR, that's VFR, that's VFR. We should see some so we've got some IFR, some out on the coast, which is pretty typical actually. So this is an actual recorded set of weather. And if I touch something, you saw, so if I touch an airport, we're gonna get some basic information about it. Just the key information that you might need to know to approach at your pattern altitude and what the field elevation is. If I want more information, so now we're gonna get into some of these buttons along the bottom, I just pull up info. And from here, this is more detailed information about that airport. As I scan along the top, the tabs, the menu here, I can get the comm frequencies. If there are airport diagrams or charts available for IFR charts, oops, we can have those too. Keep talking about ADS, speed, traffic, and weather. It decodes it for you. So here's the latest report. It's VFR, winds 150, 15, gusting 20, visibility 10. It's starting to sound like a recording. Here's your runway information. Tells you which direction traffic pattern is, width, length, all those things. And then these are the remarks out of the airport facilities directory. So the same as you would see in the green book that I don't think anybody buys anymore. So if I wanted to navigate here, I could just say direct to. And now that was, I think, yeah, that was Arlington. So that's Arlington, just north of the Seattle area. And if I zoom in, you can see it actually starts the leg here because it knows I need to turn. So if we were navigating Autopilot, it would turn onto this leg. Another interesting map feature just happened, or just shows this thing showing a glide ring, an estimated ring of your glide distance based on your current airplane configuration and speed. You can also see, because we have Arlington in a flight plan now, we also now have runway information. So this is a nice visual aid for lining up with the airport. So that's the basic, just how to look around the map. I'll talk a little bit about flight planning as well. So if I wanted to, let's say, add this airport here, 89er Whiskey Alpha, I can touch it. Yep, that's the airport. I can get some more info about it. And I'll add it to flight plan. I'm going to add it to the flight plan. I'm actually going to add it. I can choose if I want it above or below. This is actually an operation that's kind of a big pain on a lot of systems, where it's like you have to add it and then rearrange it. You can just add it wherever you want. So I'll insert it here. And then I'll just press the direct to button to navigate to it. And then you can see I've just altered my flight plan to go to that airport first and then onward. SkyView does a neat thing by default. Let's see if I can show it. There's only like a 5 or 10 degree turn, 20, so it's not that apparent. But if you're on autopilot and you fly to this airport, and then all of a sudden you get to the airport, it's like, we've got another airport to fly to. You're going to end up doing this like weird teardrop thing. If it was more like a 40 degree angle, you're going to end up doing this kind of big, teardrop leg to do that. So by default, you can set this to be a flyover. It does not fly over the airport or waypoint that you set. It'll just kind of shave the corner to make a reasonable turn up to essentially whatever the autopilot would fly, or whatever the flight planning thinks the autopilot would fly. So in this case, just like you would if you were approaching a waypoint, it's going to start turning a little bit early to kind of round the corner and just get right on the next leg and match those up as perfectly as possible. So I showed you how we can one way we can add an airport to a flight plan. Let's just take an intersection here. So I can do it one more time. So if I touch the intersection, I can go info, add the flight plan, stick that in the middle after our next one. And now I've just added between those two airports, that intersection. And you can see it's rounding off that corner. There are other ways to look up information, because we don't necessarily, as we're flying across country, want to touch and know where everything is. We might have the identifier because we've been doing some flight planning on another device, or we just know the airport. So I can also just go to info, and I can type in an airport. So I could say, let's just say if we wanted to go to Oshkosh. And so now it's Oshkosh. I can pull up other information about it if I wanted to first. And then I could just say direct to. And so now, we zoom back out. We are already about an hour into our, what is probably a 12-hour leg. And yep, you can see actually 11-hour based on the speed we're flying right now. Direct to Oshkosh with more fuel than than my body can, my bladder can manage. So let's say I wanted to find a place to stop. If I go back to, I don't have a computer here, but let's just say I know that, I need to make a stop in about 3 hours. Well, we can just kind of, we could start touching along the flight plan and say, okay, this is about an hour and a half away. So it's telling us for this, compared to the airplane, this cursor is 200 miles away, hour and a half based on our current aircraft performance. I can now say nearest, and then I can pick, let's say the nearest airport to there, and I can add that to flight plan. Oops. And put it before Oshkosh, insert, and there you go. Now I actually want to go there, so I just want to direct to it. And now we've basically found the closest airport to where I just plop my finger down. Of course, you can fine tune that to build a flight plan. We could also just, if we were building a flight plan in kind of the old school airline or conventional way, we could just always touch the end of the flight plan and touch it one more time. And maybe we want to go to, I'll just type in something random. So here's something nearby, insert at the end, and we have another, we just added something to the flight plan. There's a whole bunch of controls, options in the flight plan menu. Won't get into all of those today. Let's see, and I think that's most of the mapping features. ADS-B, I mentioned traffic and weather. When we're way zoomed out, you can sort of see this is the picture of this purple fringing is showing the borders of the ADS-B coverage. So everything that's not purple, we've received recently enough some of the next rad graphical weather. We zoom in actually in some of the mountainous areas, and especially when this was recorded, which was a few years ago, there might not have been coverage. This purple darkness means that there hasn't been weather reported here, meaning that we haven't received it. That can be an intermittent data issues. You're out of range from an ADS-B ground station during the moment that was being piped up. But it just means like we don't know what's going on here. We do know what's going on here. There is no weather, but right here we don't know what's going on. There's also along the left, it could be the right side too, but a string of info items. Everything from GPS altitude, your next waypoint, distance to waypoint, estimated time en route to next, ETA, estimated time arrival of next, your lat long. There's a whole bunch of other ones. Your distance to go, your time to final, your time at final. You can adjust those. You can also take that away, so you can go to display, map info column if you just want to get a full screen map. And I use the knob here. So if I pan away and I'm investigating, I'm looking at billings, I'm looking at airports, I'm just looking at weather down the road. If I just click the map knob, it just brings me back to the airport. And then when we're centered on, or the airplane, when I'm centered on the airplane, you can see just stay centered on it. Also, you can configure, so you see we're north up right now, or no, we're not north up, we're track up right now. We're facing the direction of flight. You can have that be north up, so we can just touch that, and now we're north up. You can also configure the zoom level. So as we zoom out, you see like it's airplane north, or track up, tracks in front of us. And now I zoom out just far enough. Once you zoom out far enough, you probably don't care about what's in front of you. You probably want to see where you are on a map. You can set that's a configurable thing as well. Let's see, I think that covers at least the basics of the mapping. I'm gonna move on to comm radios. I'm quickly just gonna change up the settings. So we're back to where we were. Going to reset this a little bit. All right, so now we're back to taking off at a paint field, and let's talk comm radio. So Dynon's comm radio is really different than other comm radios in a pretty great way. You're used to, I'm gonna kind of tip up a little bit, just to adjust this. So what you're used to doing on, almost any radio you've ever used is taking these two concentric knobs and dialing in a frequency, and you're seeing we're doing it there. It also shows down there. And you press either button, or in this case, the knob itself to flip-flop the frequencies. And that works fine. But with SkyView, you basically never have to do that. I've flown from field and Washington, the only times I ever spin in a frequency is when you're up at Ripon and you're on the Oshkosh special modem frequencies, or if we're doing air to air. Otherwise, all you need to do is we have these dedicated buttons. So this is airport, and then these are frequency specific buttons. So if I press airport, it says nearest. If I turn, that's the nearest airport. It's Painfield. We just took off out of there. I click. We've now loaded Painfield into the interface. And now if I want to get weather, or information, I just press ATIS. And now you can see that says ASOS, or one more click, it's going to be ATIS. So now I've got the ATIS. I'm going to go listen to that. I'm ready to taxi. I press, it's going to be 121.8 or 9, right? But now I've got ground. Flip flop. We're talking to ground. We're going to go to tower, a couple different tower frequencies at Painfield. You can look them up on SkyView if you're not sure which one's the right one, or if it's Unicom. Tower, flip flop, you're ready to go. And so as you're flying along, when you use this, you say like, oh, what's the nearest airport? Oh, it's this is Harvey Field. It's the next closest airport. Click it in. What's the Unicom? I'm listening. So there's no looking up frequencies if you don't want to. And again, so if there's an ASOS or an ATIS, there isn't in this case. The tower would be tower or CTAF or Unicom. Ground, if it exists, there is no ground for Harvey Field. Is a nice small little airport in the Seattle area. ATC will be the local approach or departure frequencies that are associated with that airport. So that's basically how the comm radio works. And again, if the frequency that you want, or if you're going air to air, or you're doing some, or if you're being assigned a frequency when you're flying IFR, you can still spin it in. And if you do end up on a frequency that is nearby, it'll actually identify it automatically as well. All of that is available on the done on comm radio itself, or going back to the SkyView display. If I bring this up, all the same controls are here. So there isn't a knob, but of course I can just be 1215, and now I've got that. I can swap in emergency frequency. I can if there's an airport in here, I can press the tower for the Unicom or ground. ATIS, they don't exist. You're getting that same status up here. So everything that's in the control panel itself is also available in this interface. We also have what's called dual watch on the comm radio panel. That's a press and hold, and on here it's just a single button press. And what that does is that opens up lets you listen to the standby frequency as well as the active. So normally with a comm radio, you're listening to this and that thing's in standby. With this radio, it's actually listening to both. And if something comes in on your standby, you'll hear that. If something comes out on the primary, that's going to take priority, and that'll take over the frequency. So that's essentially the comm radio. Oh, let me show you other ways, in addition to either typing in or using kind of like the magic buttons, the airport-oriented buttons or the frequency-oriented buttons. We can also go back into nearest, airport, and then comm frequencies. So now we have all those same comm frequencies that are hiding behind those buttons, but we could just go, okay, yeah, what's ATIS? We say tune comm, and when I press tune comm, that's now been shot over into the standby. And one click to do that. We can also, we go back to the airport. I could say, oh, I just want to load this airport, all the frequencies in. So I say airport to comm, and now you can see that's now saying W16. And then we can use these buttons, or we can go into the comm frequency. So that's basically a quick overview of the comm radio. You could also, there's a feature where you can, if you push the volume button up here, you can undo squelch. So if you're at the edge of the edge range for, let's say, an ATIS, or that you really want to hear because you're curious if the field's IFR or not, you can push that and then ignore the squelching of the radio, so you can hear faint signals. So transponder. So SkyView has a Modash transponder with ADS-B out. It is 2020 compliant when you use either our compliant GPS position, or if you have an IFR navigator that has a certified GPS position source. The transponder, as I mentioned earlier, is either there, or you can press menu transponder. It does all the things you'd expect it to do. We can pop in a discrete frequency, we can ident, we can squawk VFR. You can set this to be 1200 in the US, or I forget what it is in Europe, but it's different. There is also, this is configured, I think the option is turned off on this display, but you can also set, standby ground, auto, out. There's an auto mode, which when it's enabled, that's all you ever, basically don't touch the transponder when you're VFR. When you're on the ground, it's on the ground. When you start flying, it knows, it switches it to out, does all the magic itself. So most of my flying, and I'm a VFR pilot, I'm basically not touching the transponder ever, unless I am talking to a controller in the Seattle area, usually to do a downtown loop, and then they sometimes will give you a frequency to squawk. That's the transponder. And yeah, that is your ADS-B source. And then if you also have the ADS-B in receiver module, the pair of the transponder and the ADS-B in module give you all of your traffic and weather. That covers the transponder. ADS-B in and out we basically talked about. I'll talk about Autopilot next. So SkyView has a really powerful 3-axis autopilot. There's yaw damper available for the RV-10, and other airplanes. So Autopilot, like many things in SkyView, there's both 2 ways to control it and there's 2 ways to use it. We'll talk about using it first. So the Autopilot controls on screen are under here. There's Autopilot, this is all of your controls. And again, if I go to menu, Autopilot, that does the same thing. It's going to show you really quickly, the dedicated Autopilot control panel. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. There are 2 ways to use SkyView's Autopilot. So I'm just going to turn on the Autopilot and everything just lit up. So it's Autopilot Flight Director, that's the yaw damper. These are your lateral modes, so heading, track, nav. This is what the nav would be listening to. Over here we have the pitch axis controls, altitude hold, vertical speed, the nav, IAS, and up and down nose controls. But before we get into the more complex stuff, I'll talk about that. There's another way. This is what we call the expert mode. So this is very kind of airliner-like. It's very, very powerful. You can do altitude pre-selects. You can do vertical nav. You can shoot approaches, everything. I'm going to get out of here, and I'm real quickly just going to do a thing that you wouldn't normally do in flight, which is do a little quick setup function. I'm going to turn the Autopilot controls from expert to what we call simplified. And the simplified controls boil down the Autopilot to just really 2 buttons. There's a couple of options, but 3, I guess. One is level mode, straight and level. It's the big blue button. We actually sell a blue button that you can put on the panel as well, so you don't have to go into this menu. You can just push the button. It's also on the Autopilot control panel that we'll talk about in a bit. But in this case, this is for people that are not doing IFR flying, aren't shooting approaches, and the Autopilot works one of 2 ways. One is either track and out, and what that means is pick a number for both. Pick a number for what we call ground track, which is like heading but GPS based. So it's the direction you're flying over the ground. So if I want to fly north, I go change my track to 360. Oops. And then there we go. Close enough. So now we're going 360, and it's going to fly that until I tell it differently. Same thing with the altitude. It's saying 3,700 feet. Altitude's at 3,700 feet. This is the Autopilot status bar, by the way. This is saying the Autopilot's on. The green means it's on. It means that axis is engaged. That axis is engaged. This is track is your roll axis. This is your pitch axis. We were just adjusting the track, so you saw that. And if I want to adjust the altitude, I can just touch the altitude or use that dedicated knob button I'll talk about in a bit. And I'm adjusting, let's say, the altitude bug to 4,500 feet. In simplified mode, it's just going to automatically start climbing or descending to the altitude that you've selected. It'll do it at the vertical speed that you've chosen in setup. We could also adjust it if I touch a vertical speed. And now adjust that up or down, climbing a little faster. That's the one way to use Autopilot in simplified mode, which is pick numbers, pick altitude, pick direction. You can actually, and you can even use the map. Actually, if I want to go over there, I just can change the track, go over that way. I'm gonna get closer to that airport. The other way I can use Autopilot in this mode is in track mode, is HSI mode. And that means fly whatever is on the HSI, and that means really whatever I've got programmed into SkyView. So if I go HSI plus alt, that means still going to fly whatever alt I've put in over there. and it's going to try to fly the flight plan that's in the system. So if we kind of zoom out, it means it's going to, in this case, zoom out on the map. So we got a flight plan. What it's going to do is it's going to try to fly the flight plan, which is over here. In our demo mode, it doesn't go attack the flight plan like it would in real life, but it'll basically center the needle, fly the flight plan. So again, going back to that, bringing up the autopilot menu, and you can see it says over here, this mode is GPS. It's like I'm flying the GPS. I'm flying the altitude you asked for. I'm flying the GPS. So if I go back to the autopilot menu, I can go fly a number. I can go fly the HSI. I can do, there's a button for 180, which just immediately reverses course. We flew into clouds. We're VFR only, accident. Didn't mean to. Get me out of there real quick. 180 button's real helpful for that. So that's simplified mode. I'll go back and now talk about expert mode. So it's with the setup I have today, it's easiest to show this on screen, but I am going to first talk about the autopilot control panel for a bit. Actually, I'll talk about both of these features together. These are two pieces of hardware because they actually do complement each other pretty well. All right. So here we've got, let's change this, PFD. All right, so now we have another kind of single screen system here. Oops. All right. So this is the dedicated autopilot control panel. You'll use this with expert mode only because it has all of these buttons. And the buttons that here basically mirror the buttons on screen. So we have the autopilot, engage, disengage. This is flight director. I'll talk about that in a minute. On the left here, or on the top, if you get the vertical version, it's available in both, is heading track, heading and track mode. So heading is magnetic heading. Track is very similar to, but is the direction you're flying as far as the GPS cares. What's the difference between these two? Heading is what direction you're pointed. You know, it's if you're pointing north and you ask for heading 360, the airplane's going to point north. If you've got a wind coming from the west that's pushing you east, you're actually going to fly. You know, you're pointing north, but you're going to fly this way. Heading, if you're flying IFR, heading is what air traffic control wants you to fly, and they do the wind correction. Track mode is I want to fly in the north direction. So if I say 360, even if there's wind, you know, we're going to fly north. That means even if the airplane is pointed, let's say, you know, this way to counter a wind coming, you know, that way, you know, you will track north. So it kind of does the wind correction for you. Track is super useful when you are trying to get yourself somewhere over a map, but you're not using the flight plan. Nav is basically follow what's on the HSI. And source is a button that will change what we're following. So if we have different sources, that's the same as touching on the screen, this data block here. So if I push source, this is an external GPS, this is external VOR, nav radio, and then nothing, and then back to SkyView's internal flight plan. You can see on here, you get that same toggle as well. So these are all of the roll axis options, so heading, track, or nav. On the pitch side, so again, we'll start with the autopilot control panel. We have altitude hold. Does exactly what you think it would do. It just holds the current altitude. Vertical speed, which puts us in vertical speed mode, which will fly up or down at a vertical speed you ask for. VNav, which if you have something, whether it's a glide path from SkyView's own calculations or an ILS or a glide slope from an LPV approach, if there's anything that is giving you vertical guidance over here, you can fly it using the VNav button on the vertical axis instead of holding altitude or flying a vertical speed. And similarly to vertical speed, IAS lets the airplane will pitch up or down to maintain the airspeed you ask for. So again, really useful when you're climbing out and you want to do, let's say, VY plus 10 knots for that, because that's where your airplane is happiest in terms of cooling and comfort and pit and deck angle. Let's say in an RV, you know, you might say, I want to climb an IAS and then, you know, give it fly a climber descent to that. You know, in contrast, maybe when you're descending, you might want to descend on vertical speed because you've got your kid in the airplane with you, and his ears need a certain rate of adjustment. There are also other buttons on here which are nose up and nose down, and these change what they do depending on if you're in vertical speed and we say nose up, it's going to increase the vertical speed. You can see the vertical speed bug is going up and down 100 feet per minute. If we're in indicated airspeed mode, it's going nose up is going to decrease the airspeed bug, because climbing at a slower airspeed, to climb at a slower airspeed, you need to increase your pitch angle. Level button does the same thing as it does as I showed you before. Straight and level, sort of like the one touch fix everything. And so that's the autopilot control panel. I'm going to go back over to the screen and talk a little bit about how to use the autopilot. All right, so if we don't have anything going on, we're just cleaning up from cruise climb and we haven't done the autopilot, and just say autopilot. It engages in, this is in expert mode, in roll hold mode and vertical speed hold mode. And what that really means is keep doing what I was doing. If I had a few degrees of roll, it's just going to kind of keep those few degrees in. If I was climbing it, if I was straight and level and it had 0 vertical speed, it's going to keep doing that. If I was climbing at 300 feet per minute, it would keep doing that. From there, you can tell it what you want to do. Okay, so I want to go heading mode and I want to hold altitude. Heading mode, and it has, you can see this is the heading that it thinks that it wants to fly. And you can also see down here that same color, the heading bug matches up. So if I adjust heading, the heading bug's over here, the autopilot's flying to match it. We are at 4,500 feet. We are holding altitude. So right now we're kind of, the autopilot's happy, right? We're on heading, we're on altitude. Let's say I want to change altitude. What I do then is I would say altitude. I change my altitude bug. And let's say I want to descend to 2,500. So I've changed that to 2,500. Nothing's happened yet, because in expert mode, this is letting you plan your next thing. So we're at 4,500. My altitude bug is at 2,500, but we're not going anywhere because we're in altitude hold mode. If I want to start descending, a few ways I can do it, but the easiest way is to just say nose down. That's going to change to vertical speed mode, which is, you can see is active because it's green. And altitude hold in white, with that white indication, is saying that it is armed, but not active. So if we look over at the autopilot status area, vertical speed -500, we asked for a descent by saying nose down, and it picked 500 feet per minute, because that's what I programmed in the configuration. Until I get to the next altitude, until I get to the altitude that I set, which is 2,500 feet. So I'm going to cheat here. I'm just going to up the altitude to, let's say, 3,900 feet. And as we get closer, you can see there's the bug. It's the altitude bug, just like the heading bug. It's a little cyan thing. And as we get closer to 3,900 feet, you can see the autopilot status is going to change. In just a minute, it just changed to altitude hold within 100 feet. Now it's going to start leveling off, saying, oh, we just changed. You'll hear autopilot mode in your headset, which says, hey, I just changed something. Something just changed. And now we're going to acquire 3,900 feet. We are back in altitude hold mode. And we continue on. If we were to do nav mode again, so in expert mode, I selected nav mode. It arms it. Unlike in simplified mode, where it'll just go chase the flight plan, you have to actually cause it to intercept. So I would need to take, so it's saying it's still in heading mode, which is where I was a second ago. I asked for nav mode. It's saying, okay, sure, I'll give you nav mode. Just give me a flight plan that you're to fly on. So in this case, I would need to adjust my heading bug to intercept. And so you can see that, we've got the to from, or that's the direction of the flight plan. We're off course. So I'll just cut an intercept angle. So slowly we're turning around. When we become on course, it will, just like it did with heading or arm to out hold, we will transition to nav mode, and it'll just continue to fly the flight plan. let's say you want the guidance from the autopilot system, but you don't want, you just want to hand fly. Flying is actually fun. So we can turn off the autopilot without turning off the flight director. The flight director is these magenta bars. So the yellow wedge is your pitch and roll level line essentially, or the aircraft's attitude reference. It doesn't do it in the demo because it's kind of tied together, but this magenta wedges that sit on top of it will actually go where the autopilot would be flying if you had the autopilot servos engaged. So if we said choose a new heading, what would actually happen here if I kept flying straight is it would say, hey, I really would like some roll right now, and you'll see those magenta wedges just start to roll. And then when you match by actually banking or pitching physically with the stick, you capture that, and then you're doing what the autopilot wants. So it's almost like you're still using the autopilot for the guidance, but you're flying it manually. That's what the flight director does. I think that covers, there's a lot more. There's a lot more of the autopilot, of course, the yaw damper. If you have that, that's a separate control. And there are quite a few more features, especially when we get into expert and IFR flying. All of the basics we just covered though, which is how to arm something, how to transition. Same thing if we wanted to do VNAV. If I altitude hold and I want to capture a glide slope that normally you approach it from below the glide slope. If I said VNAV, which there's nothing on the screen that can be VNAV to, so I can't turn on, but it would arm and then it would go active and transition from altitude hold when it is able to capture a glide slope. So that workflow is the same as I just demonstrated with the altitude hold and vertical speed. That is autopilot. A couple of things, so we do have synthetic vision. I talked about the terrain alerting earlier. You can also see the airports that are in the distance, they're kind of flagged. So if I just want to fly towards the airport, I'll get there. Also, you have some of the cardinal headings, and I think it's every 30 degrees. Yeah, 330, north, 300. So there's some contextual clues for situational awareness in the synthetic vision. If we were, if I reset this, if you're near an airport, runways are where they're supposed to be. They have the right amount of stripes indicating their width and size and all of that. You can see over here in the distance, let's fly over this way. You have obstacles. If they're red, they're within 100 feet of you. If they're yellow, they're within, I think it's 1,000 feet of you. That's adjustable. And if they're not there, they're not a factor. So the obstacles are dynamic. They match the obstacles that you would see on a chart or the database that you load into SkyView. And that's one of the neat things about synthetic vision. I talked about transponder. We talked about autopilot. Oh, I'll come back to the knob control panel. So we've been adjusting everything using these knobs, which we can adjust by clicking and choosing the function, or by touching the screen to select the function, to reassign the function. But if you have autopilot, the knob control panel has 3 knobs for adjusting the things you change the most in flight, which is your heading or track. So you see I'm not adjusting anything on the screen, it's just heading or track, the altimeter setting, and the altitude bug. This is most of your autopilot flying. If you're not flying a flight plan, are these 2, and your altimeter setting. And as we talked about, if you have weather coming in from ADS-B, just press and hold that. Nearest airport, it syncs to the weather. If you don't have ADS-B, but you are on the ground, and we know you're on the ground because you have low airspeed and no GPS speed, if you press and hold that, it'll sync to the elevation for the airport, which we also know. So if I go to nearest and then just go to information about this airport, we have the elevation and an estimated traffic pattern. It'll actually tell you what the traffic pattern is if it's published, and if there isn't more than one, which there is at Payne Field. By default, it'll show you, that plus 1,000 feet. We talked about nearest. It's hopping around a little bit. So we go to nearest airports, but there's other things. There are nearest other things, right? Nearest weather stations, nearest VORs. Although there isn't a nav radio in SkyView, you can still navigate to where the VOR is. NDBs, fixes, visual reporting points, user waypoints. So right now we're pretend flying near Dynon, which is just northeast of the Seattle downtown area. Air traffic control frequencies, these are your Seattle center and other center frequencies, and flight service stations. And again, same thing, if I have, if I want to throw this into the comm, I select one, tune comm, it's now up in the Seattle flight service station, flip-flop, ready to go. All right. I'm going to talk, I think I've covered most of the, let's take a step back here. I think we've covered most of the feature areas, at least with a little bit of depth. We are an hour in. So I'm going to kind of wrap up by briefly showing you the pieces behind the panel. I'm just going to unmount my camera here. So all of SkyView goes together with modules, so that perform different functions. So this here is we call the AirInc module on top here. This is an interface to IFR nav comms, like the Avidyne IFD series, the Garmin GNS GTN, and the newer radios. If you have one of those, you get one of these. Below it, same size, different interface, is your ADAHRs. This is all of your flight instruments: attitude, turn rate, slip skid ball, angle of attack, pitot, static. So all of your air data is in here as well. Small box. If you're IFR, you want 2 of these. We sell you the second one for less money because we really want you to have 2 to keep yourself safe, to be well backed up. Underneath that, this is the engine monitoring module. 37-pin connector for most of the sensors, a 25-pin connector for all your EGTs, CHTs. This is the backside of the displays, which have a 37-pin connector for power and various inputs and outputs, serial ports to some of our devices, but a lot of third-party devices. And then these other 2 9-pin connectors are what we call SkyView network. SkyView network is a dual redundant power, dual redundant data bus that will tell you when something's wrong with it. It's what many of the SkyView modules and displays connect via. All of the panel mounted things, like the displays and the knob module, the comm radio, actually have 2 of these, so you can just sort of daisy chain things together. I mentioned dual redundant data and power. So let's say you have, there's also things like hubs to make more SkyView network ports. Let's say you had a cable that was going through the airplane and a rib is, or something is fraying the cable. Eventually you're gonna cut through a data line or power line. The power line's low voltage, it's not going to, cause ignition or anything like that, or cause a fire. Or low current, I should say. It's low current and low voltage. But let's say you severed a data line. SkyView knows, and it's got 2 buses. Like, oh, I lost one of my 2 data buses. I'm going to switch to the other pair, and I'm going to throw an alert that says, hey, check your wiring. And you'll do that, and you'll give us a call, or you'll check your manual. And then using SkyView's setup menus, you can figure out where, or at least kind of where in the chain of things that are connected together, where that break might be. The comm radio is a combination of both this panel mounted module and a transceiver. The other transceiver is the transponder module. Back here, this is the SkyView backup battery. It'll keep one display and all of the core components going for at least an hour. This is something that we currently sell and market into our Dynon certified line, which is a mounting tray to mount all of these things on. Otherwise, you can put them anywhere behind the panel or other places in the airplane. Some people like to put the ADAHRs closer to perhaps a static. In the back of the airplane is a pretty popular place in RV series. So then you run the cable instead of the pitot-static lines to the front of the aircraft. We will be making a version of this that is a little more universal and for everybody in the future. That's most of the bits and pieces. These are actual SkyView network cables. I mean, this is kind of how clean an install will look. And you don't even need to do the wiring. We have harnesses for just about everything now. So whether it's the 37-pin display harness, the SkyView network cables, the intercom, comm radio, we basically have just about everything. We have wiring harnesses for Autopilot servers that include power. Let's see. If that isn't call it, simple enough, for you from an installation perspective. We also have our sister company, Advanced Flight Systems. So Advanced Flight Systems, I don't have their panel here, but they manufacture and sell a line of products, which the latest, which is the AF5000 series, which are very much like SkyView. There's some slight feature differences. There's our, for example, more square, their form factor. This is a 16:9 screen. They have a 4:3 screen, which means it's kind of more square, a little taller, a little thinner. That uses all of the same backend components, all the same SkyView network modules and comm radio modules and whatnot. And Advanced Flight Systems also has what's called an advanced panel. An advanced panel is a panel that we build, configure, tailor. We work with you to determine your ideal dream panel. We then build it literally on a panel, like this, ship it to you with harnesses that are plug and play, even more so than our regular setup when you're building your own panel, ready to go. And you can install a panel in, I think the record is like literally like a couple of days. I think for most people it's probably a week or few. The advanced panel also comes with what we call the advanced control module. And we'll probably do webinars on that completely separate. The advanced control module is kind of a box that allows you to, that brings in all of your wiring cables. It's also electronic circuit breakers for the airplane. It also controls lights, taxi lights, and a whole bunch of, basically most of the airplane systems. So it's kind of a hub for everything. And because we've thought about let's say you start out with a well-equipped VFR panel. When we build you an advanced panel, you can literally drop in an IFR navigator and a second display. We can even build the panel to accept that second display when you're ready for it. And you can do upgrades, completely transforming the airplane's capability in hours, in the work of an afternoon. So if you are interested in having a panel made for you, we can do that too. And that's Advanced Flight Systems, and that product is called Advanced Panel. You can equip it with either SkyView or Advanced Flight Systems displays. That basically takes us through, I think, most of the system. I'm going to see where we are. It looks like the Zoom has one person in it. Does anybody have any questions, or either of my colleagues are there any questions from Facebook?
Mike, we've been answering quite a few questions on Facebook. We've
Okay.
just been messaging back and forth with them.
Perfect. Is there any, for the one of you on Zoom, any questions for me? All right. I guess we'll leave it there then. We're a little bit over. Thanks for watching, guys. We are going to be doing these a lot more often. This is kind of the test run, which is why we published it just a couple of hours ago, to make sure that we have kind of the technology working, and it'll just get better from here. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.